Hello and welcome to Frankly Speaking, where we dive deep into regional headlines and speak with leading policymakers and business leaders. I am Katie Jensen. On today's program, we hear from Fiona Hill, a former number 10 Downing Street Chief of Staff and trusted advisor to Prime Minister Theresa May. Ms Hill plans to stage the first security conference focused on promoting global resilience. We ask her whether her work can compare to other events like the World Economic Forum, whether Rishi Sunak can restore the UK's credibility after years of turmoil, and if closer ties between the UK and Saudi Arabia are being welcomed back home. Ms Hill, thank you for joining us on Frankly Speaking. Now, you worked as the Chief of Staff for the former Prime Minister Theresa May. You've also been a media advisor to many prominent figures and a former journalist as well. So I have to ask, why are you now venturing into the events business? And frankly speaking, does the world really need another forum?
That's an excellent question to start with. I wouldn't say that I'm moving into the events world. What I'm trying to do is create a new debate. And to be able to create that new debate, there needs to be a platform. And so the forum, the Future Resilience Forum, which I'm launching next week, is a platform for moving the dial on how we currently think and speak about foreign and security policy. So I'm not an events expert by any stretch of the imagination. This is really about saying to the world that we in Europe, we in the wider West, need to have a rethink about, or a reset about how we collaborate, how we do diplomacy, how we set our foreign and security policy over the next 10 to 20 years.
Okay, so you say it is about having a debate, but this is still a debate that could take place behind closed doors. So do we need another conference? Because it is quite a crowded area globally. We have the World Economic Forum, the Munich Security Conference, and locally, think tanks such as Chatham House and RUSI are more than capable of filling the gap. So what is the added value for the Future Resilience Forum?
Well, I spent a decade at the top of politics. Very few of those conferences have been set up by former chiefs of staff of a leading liberal Western democracy. So I'm coming at it with a very keen eye on outputs. I want it to almost be a red team event for policy making in governments, a place where people can come and speak frankly and privately, I must add. This is not a big media jamboree, it's essentially a private event for people to be able to discuss the short-term issues that they might be facing that's preventing them from thinking in the longer term. Because I think, given the challenges that we face in the world, it requires not just that collaborative working, but longer-term vision and longer-term thinking.
And there's certainly some very interesting topics up for debate at the forum. Now, if this is successful, would you consider moving it to other countries, say Saudi Arabia, for example?
I wouldn't rule anything out. Whatever feels like it's the right thing for the right to output, that's what I'll do.
Well, interesting. I think watch this space. And I must say, for a first edition, you certainly have a very impressive lineup of speakers. I know the current Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, he's going to be giving a keynote speech at the event. What would you say the other main attractions are?
I think it's the content. You know, yes, we do have good speakers, and those speakers will bring out the content. But for me, it's the content that sells the event. It is a very finely honed content programme this year. We are looking predominantly at what's happening in the Global South, and we're examining our approach to the Global South and the West and asking the question, is it working? I think probably we can say no. And then being actually quite honest and asking ourselves why it doesn't work. and listening to those people from those countries tell us what we get wrong. That's a good starting point for me to start working on the policy that is how we get it right in the future, and how we reset those relationships, how we deepen them, how we make them meaningful, and how we take on competition from China and from Russia.
So let's talk a little bit more deeply about the theme of resilience. Why resilience? What does it mean to you? And why do you think governments should be looking at this, particularly as we are seeing this shifting change in power?
Yeah. Well, your initial question was asking me, is there really a need for another conference? As I said, this is not what I think of as a conference. This is a debate. And the reason that there's a need for this, and the reason why it's different, and to answer your question that you just asked, is that we're starting from a blank slate. You know, everything has changed post-1945, post-war. And we are now going through rapid changes, whether that's in technology or whether that's in our climate or whether it's in geopolitical shifts. There's a lot happening at the same time, and it's all happening rather quickly. So we need to really start preparing. And part of that preparedness is actually building resilience. If we don't build resilience, then mistakes will be made. So we need to really start from scratch and ask ourselves difficult questions and use the evidence and the material from those difficult questions to start building that resilience, so that we can then move into the future for future generations with a kind of security and foreign policy that can stand the test of not just time, but the future, and what the future looks like and what the future holds.
And I think what is key now is whether you can take these words and turn the talk into action. But it certainly is a fascinating arena, particularly because you've had such an interesting career in politics. At one point, you were labelled the second most powerful woman in number 10 at Downing Street, right after your boss, who was, of course, Prime Minister Theresa May. So why, if I can ask, why didn't you consider returning to politics, potentially running as an MP or taking on another government role?
Because politics and working in government, there is a traditional way of working. And that's the way governments must be run. There has to be order, and there has to be bureaucracy, and there has to be ways of working. I personally like to think and behave more entrepreneurially. I like to be agile. I like the freedom to think for myself and to identify where I feel the risks are, and then building teams, almost like project teams, around those risks. I mean, the Future Resilience Forum is in effect a large, project team. And I think it's also very, very useful for governments to have these types of forum conferences running, because actually it is a case of all hands on deck right now, because of everything that I just set out by way of the speed of change and the type of change. So there really, I personally don't think there can be enough of debate going on in the world right now. Apart from anything else, a debate and speaking to each other is a fantastic way to de-escalate what might end up if we don't speak, and if we don't have conferences, and if we don't support our governments across the world. We may end up in a place where, we no longer live in peaceful times. Not that it's particularly peaceful in some places, but the point is that we all need to work together for a peaceful and a prosperous global security and world.
Well, let's talk about some of these challenges, because there is no denying the UK's global reputation isn't at its best these days. We have seen political crisis after political crisis. So what would you say is the main problem, and how can it be fixed?
Well, I have to say that I don't paint the bleak picture that you have painted of the UK. It may look that we've had a succession of events that have taken place, like, for example, Brexit. But really, if you live here, it doesn't feel as perhaps you might see it from where you are.
I mean, if we look at
we live in a democracy, and that means that we have election cycles, and of course, with election cycles, that does throw up, various issues. That's just the way democracy works. That's the point of a democracy. But nevertheless, you asked me what I think of the UK at the moment. I think the UK, like every other leading Western liberal democracy, in fact, like pretty much every other country, because of the challenges that I just set out, is working hard to figure it all out, how to explain it to our electorate, and to really try and resist short-term political rhetoric that can damage sometimes longer-term policy making. And I think that the current Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, who, as you said, is coming to the conference for 3 hours of his time, he understands that. And he's an extremely clever and able man, and the right person to have at the helm right now. We, as you know, will have an election in the not too distant future, and the opposition party under Sir Keir Starmer, these guys are serious also. They also understand the threat and the challenges and the complexity of all those challenges. And they're working hard during their time in opposition, and you'll see them in the coming days go through their own party conference season, and it'll be very interesting to hear what they are talking about, what they're saying about what they think the right thing to do is.
Let's talk about
what some of the answers are.
Because I know you're saying that life in the UK doesn't seem too bleak at the moment, but I feel like the average person there would disagree with you. I mean, we consider the various political crises and changes in leadership I've mentioned. 50,000 refugees are facing homelessness by the end of the year, something we were reporting on in Arab News just days ago. If you look at the NHS crisis, the rental crisis, one home has an average number of 25 people waiting in the queue at the moment. The inflation we're seeing there, the cost of living crisis, that is expected to last another 10 months. And we've seen such a big policy reversal from Rishi Sunak recently, talking about net zero targets. People are up in arms about the cancellation of the northern leg of the HS2. Now, Sunak might have told media just days ago ahead of the Tory party conference, he said, we're attracting billions of pounds of investment into this country. We are creating jobs everywhere. But day after day, we continue to see these headlines coming out of the UK about the various crises. Are they accurate, or is it a media beat-up?
Well, I mean, firstly, I'm not a politician, so I'm not here to defend or explain what politicians are doing. And I think everyone in all walks of life have problems. That's life. And of course, there will always be people in society who need our help. And that's the role of government, and that's the role of civic society, which I'm involved in also. But look, running a country is difficult. It's difficult no matter what type of political structure you have. There will always be competing priorities, and that's tough to do. All people can do, what leaders can do, is do their best, and to be serious, and to work hard, and to not give in to short-term wins at the expense of long-term aim. And that's always a juggle for any politician and any government.
Okay, but do you acknowledge that some of the blame, with the challenges we do see today, that some of that has to fall on Prime Minister Theresa May? After all, we know she could not deliver on Brexit, and a long list of other promises too.
Well, I'm afraid I don't really play the blame game, if you like. So I'm not going to blame anyone. I've worked in government, and unless you've worked in government, you can never really know how hard it is and the challenges that you face.
Okay, sure, and there's no denying she was certainly dealt a difficult hand, but there's many pundits out there who would say that she still played that hand pretty badly.
I'm not the kind of person who looks back, I look forward. And in looking forward, that's why I've set up the Future Resilience Forum.
Okay, what about Boris Johnson? Do you think she would have done a better job at handling the pandemic than Mr Johnson did?
I'm also not getting into league tables of Prime Ministers and how good or how bad they were. That's pointless to me.
Okay, well, let's talk about Rishi Sunak. We were mentioning him. We're talking about looking towards the future. Now, he has pledged to restore stability after Liz Truss's rather short reign. Now, there are some people who say he is the perfect Prime Minister, but at the wrong time. What do you think?
I think at the end of the day, Rishi Sunak is a man who wakes up in the morning, looks at the challenges that his government faces, and asks the right questions, and has the right mindset and a very good brain to be able to do his very best for his country, and not just for his country, but also for the good that the UK can do in the world. And I know that he and his team, he's surrounded by an excellent team of advisors. They are really, really good advisors. He's very lucky. But, I think that they are a good team, and are they a good team at the wrong time? I mean, a good team's a good team. It doesn't matter if it's a wrong time or a bad time, and how do you define what's wrong, a wrong time and a bad time? They're a good team. They'll do what they will need to do, and at the end of the day, they'll be judged at the election by the electorate, and if they succeed, then they'll obviously be happy about that. And if they don't, then democracy will have done its job, and we'll look to a new set of people to take on and inherit those problems that we currently face.
Okay, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on Labor leading in the polls at the moment, but I'll come to that a little bit later. I wanted to ask you something else that Theresa May once famously said. She said, "Our security is your security." Very inspiring speech, and certainly something that had huge significance here in the GCC. So tell me the story behind that.
Well, that was a speech that she gave, and I was with her when she delivered that speech. And that was to say that for a very, 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 very long time, the United Kingdom and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia have worked completely together in a deep and meaningful partnership in counter-terrorism, in organised crime. Pretty much the whole security gambit. The UK has always looked to Saudi Arabia as one of its most serious partners in shaping what our security strategy is. And that's really what she was saying. She was saying to the GCC, we cannot have a credible national security strategy if we don't work in concert with you, because you're absolutely vital to what our security and our security response is.
And certainly we have seen that relationship really change and evolve over the last few years. It's been given a welcome boost, particularly with the relationship with Saudi Arabia. Some very positive comments recently by the British Defence Minister, Grant Shapps, praising Saudi Arabia for its incredible quick transformation. He also said, "Forget everything you think you know about Saudi Arabia." So it feels like you're quite supportive of stronger ties between the two kingdoms, would you say?
Well, I'm a huge fan of Saudi Arabia. I've visited many, many times in my life, and I have friends there. And I think it's amazing, the progress that has happened. And it's a really vibrant and exciting place right now, and a great place to be and to visit as a tourist. But, for me, I don't really see borders. I really, really don't. I've always been like that. I don't think of a country being in a far-off place and not something to be thought about in my everyday thinking about what the challenges in the world might be. So I'm a little bit of a nomad like that. Once I rack up in a country, I absorb it and I love it. And obviously I have my favourite countries to visit, and Saudi actually happens to be one of them.
Interesting. I know you've got a very good network in Saudi. I know you're very well connected with various ambassadors and ministers, newspaper editors, as well as major business people. I'd be interested to understand what are your thoughts on some of the sweeping reforms, the biggest changes that you've seen in Saudi over the last few years. I know you were here in Saudi this time last year. So what are the biggest changes you've seen?
Well, I think it's just a very simple transition from being reliant on one thing for an economy. You know, KSA is still relatively a young country, and so rightly your government is looking to diversify that reliance. That seems to me to be very, very sensible. And you know, keeping up with the modern world through technology and so forth, again, just very sensible. And I think it's amazing the pace at which the Crown Prince and his government have managed to do it. And you know, I wish every amount of luck for further progress because, as Theresa said, you know, your security is our security. And what's interesting to me, actually, in organising the Future Resilience Forum is how that's actually becoming even more the case than before. As we see China dominance in the global south, we will look to countries like Saudi Arabia or Qatar almost as shock absorbers between East and West. So, you know, that security relationship, far from becoming less relevant in the future, I see it as being almost absolutely critical in the future and for security in the West.
And I think, I know you are a regular visitor to the region. I know you were in Doha recently, and I wanted to talk about what's taking place in the UAE at the moment. A major meeting coming up, of course, COP28, a big climate change summit. That will be taking place in November. Now, the UAE has received quite a lot of criticism because it is also a major oil producer. Of course, the obvious comeback to that would be that, you know, so was Scotland when they hosted a couple of years ago. So do you think some of those criticisms are justified?
Well, sadly, actually, Scotland isn't as big a producer as I think it ought to be. Being Scottish, I'm very, very proud of our oil and gas industry. I understand that the need to meet those climate challenges are very, very real. But I don't think we should be throwing the baby out with the bathwater too quickly because this transition will take time. And it won't just take time in terms of how we get the right technology and how we get replacement energy. It's also about how people will react to it and how people will absorb it into their new everyday ways of using energy and consuming energy. And that just won't happen overnight. And so when people are critical of any country and its use of fossil fuels, I get it. People care about the planet, but I do think we have to be pragmatic about this. And pragmatism, for me, always wins the day. And that's what I think the approach ought to be to the energy transition.
And I think you make an interesting point. I think that's why a country like the UAE is involved in this. We certainly heard from the COP28 president designate. He's talked about why it's so important for oil and gas companies to be involved in the discussion of this transition. And you look at someone like ADNOC produces one of the lowest carbon crude oil producers in the world. So I think that's an interesting point. My last
and also we can't do it without a big economy like China. You know, so there's literally no point in criticising other countries for fossil fuels. We've all been living with fossil fuels for years and years and years and years. What we need to do is work together and work in collaboration and be honest brokers about what really is achievable in each and every country. I mean, the UK is tiny compared to other countries in terms of its emissions. And yes, we can lead by showing that we're intent on dropping those emissions to meet the climate challenge. But it's really those big economies like China and America that will have the biggest impact purely because they are the countries with the highest source of emissions.
And I think climate change certainly does need to be addressed, but I think it's also important to note that a lot of the countries who have complained about the lack of change are those that really flourished as a result of the Industrial Revolution. Countries like the US, like the UK, and the huge amount of emissions that have taken place in their nations since then. But my final question is, we're almost out of time. Now, almost every political analyst is expecting Labor to take over the helm at number 10 Downing Street very soon. They do have a very healthy lead in the polls. So what is your assessment of the situation? Is Keir Starmer the right person for the job? And if you were to advise him, what would you say he needs to tackle first?
Well, the first thing I would say is that having been part of the 2017 general election campaign with Theresa May, where all the polls indicated that we would have an 80+ majority, and then we ended up losing more or less. I mean, we hung on with a few seats, but no one thought that Theresa would lose that election, and she did. So, polls can get it wrong, and they often do. So if anyone tells you that they know what will happen at the UK election when it happens, then they maybe know something I don't. What advice would I give Keir? Come to the Future Resilience Forum and find out what's happening in terms of security and foreign policy and where the debate is, and get ready for what will be a very difficult time to be a Prime Minister. These are not easy times. You said this yourself earlier. And so it really does test the mettle of a person who can take on a job like Prime Minister in the United Kingdom right now with the challenges that Prime Minister will face. Do
you think he's the right man for the job, though? Because a lot of people say that he's still more of a lawyer than a politician.
I've met him. He's a very nice man. He is there to do the right thing. And at the end of the day, the key thing is for anyone in that job that they have to have that desire of public service and doing the right thing, and he has that.
We will find out very soon. Ms Hill, thank you very much for joining us today. Best of luck. We look forward to hopefully seeing the forum over in Saudi or the GCC very soon. Thank you very much for joining us today on Frankly Speaking.
Thank you so much, and thank you to Arab News for inviting me on. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.